everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the virtual beer tasting with 50 West. My name is Emily and I work with Miami's Alumni chapters, Josh Wilson and Scott LaFollette. Will be joining us tonight. They are 50 West head of brewing operations and head of production brewing. Tonight we will taste 4 beers and we will learn a little bit about the history of these styles as well as how they were made and specific tasting notes about each one. Thank you so without further ado, go ahead and take it away, Josh and Scott.
Hello, everybody. My name is Scott LaFollette. As Emily mentioned, I am the head of brewing operations here at 50 West Brewing Company.
Josh Wilson, head production brewer at 50 West Brewing Company.
Just a real quick little synopsis about our brewery here. 50 West Brewing Company has been here on the east side of Cincinnati, started in 2012 as a small little brew pub, and has grown since then to be a brew pub and now a large production facility, and now we just added a new restaurant next door, and we're working on an expansion to build a brew pub in Chillicothe, Ohio. So definitely grown up from where we started. Tonight we're gonna go through and taste a few beers with you guys. Talk a little bit about the beers, a little bit about their kind of history, and also maybe a little about their 50 West history. Yeah, hopefully we'll have a little fun. So Josh is grabbing the first one here. First beer we're going to talk about is 50 West American Lager. There we go. I'm a little new at this whole computer video thing, so I'm going to do a lot of stupid dad jokes tonight, probably. Anyway, 50 West American Lager. It's a beer that's been around for, oh goodness, at least 4 or 5 years, probably.
Yeah, I've been here about 5 years.
Been through a few different iterations. There's a lot of beer out there that's considered lager. There are lagers, there are ales. Goes into how they're fermented, all that. We'll leave that technical piece out of it for now. Lagers are generally what most people are accustomed to. With the American styles, Bud Light, all of those things are technically considered lagers. So this is kind of our craft version of a lager. I don't want to say compete with those beers, but definitely to kind of put our own spin on it. This beer, although we call it American Lager, it's interesting. We actually brew it with nothing but 100% German ingredients. So you could technically, I guess, say it's German American Lager. It's a very, very simple beer. It's brewed with 100% German Pilsner malt, 100% Hallertau middle fruit German hops, and German lager yeast. So it's a very, very simple recipe, very, very simple in concept beer. Very good, easy, light drinker. Comes in at 4.5% alcohol. And there you go. This is our fancy little dimple mug that we like to drink out of around here, especially when it comes to the German lagers. So when you smell this beer, you'll get a nice bready, toasty aroma. You'll get some of those kind of characteristic, what I always call lager flavors that you'll get, in just about any lager beer. Just a very slight touch of kind of almost honey character, a little bit of a very light, almost fruit character, kind of an indiscriminate fruit, not berry or citrus or anything. But then when you go to drink this beer, it's going to be real light on the palate, real easy to drink, real easy to kind of get down. Nice, crisp, very clean. And then, when you're done, you're ready for the next sip. So cheers, everybody. Let's have a drink. This is definitely the beer that we mostly gravitate towards around here ourselves. We're always happy when we can this beer because we always make sure at least a few cases kind of fall off the truck and end up in our cooler for us to drink at the end of pretty much every day.
Especially during the summer seasons.
especially in the summer. So this is, I would say, it's, if you're looking for, when people come into the bar and they say, what's the lightest beer you have, or what do you have that tastes the most like Budweiser or Bud Light? Number one, we say nothing, because nothing tastes like Bud Light, nor should it. But second to that, we say, yes, here, have an American lager. And that's, it's probably, especially in the summer, at our premise here with our outdoor areas and volleyball courts, probably the number one beer that we go through all summer long. Still gets drank a lot in the winter, but definitely a real good just summer porch drinking beer. And if there's any questions as we go along, Emily might chime in here, but shoot them to Emily there, however that works, and we'll do our best to answer them. Again, just a little bit more kind of into the background. So the style, if you will, American lager is not really a traditional style. This beer's really based more off of a kind of Czech lager, German Pilsner, so that kind of general area of the world, where they use a lot of just very simple ingredients. Again, this is nothing but Pilsner malt, middle fruit hops, which are all a noble hop that's grown only in certain areas of Germany, and then a lager yeast that's cultivated from one of the larger, more well-known German breweries, which will remain nameless as of right now. But yeah, that's 50 West American Lager. So let's have another sip.
I will say that the particular yeast that Scott was referring to, we keep in house all year round. We brew this beer all year round, and something interesting that we do with the yeast is we like to brew really cool, interesting lagers over at our brew pub. Our head of innovation brewing, Brian Hayes, he's in the last year and a half, probably about a year and a half, he started a nice lager program where we've utilized this yeast and tried different styles of lagers, be it Dunkels or German Pilsners or Czech Pilsners. Just tried a lot of different styles, and here at 50 West we have the fortunate we're fortunate enough to have what's called a Czech slow pour. So if you're ever in the area and you come in and you to our brew pub and you ask for a slow pour, it takes about 5 minutes, but it's wonderful. What it does is it creates this huge mound of foam that comes off the top of the glass, and to me, foam is beer too, and that's one of my favorite parts of drinking a beer is the aromas, the aromatics from the foam, and actually consuming the foam alone actually adds to the drinking experience. So if you like this beer, you'll probably enjoy one or another of our other lagers that we produce throughout the year.
I will preface that by saying that is only available at our brew pub, which has not yet reopened because of the COVID pandemic. We are working on that, but we do not have a definitive timeline as of yet, just because of all the things that are going on in the world. But when it does get back up and running, the slow pour is definitely something really cool to come in and check out. Do we have any questions? No questions so far. All right. Well, either that or we're doing such a bad job that everyone's falling asleep. All right. Well, I guess we'll get ready to move on to the second beer. You want to talk? I'll get it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, me personally, I've been here at 50 West for about 5 years. This is my first professional brewing job. Home brewed for probably in total, I'd say about 3 years. Did a lot of batches with friends and family. Was fortunate enough to learn from a lot of very talented people as a home brewer as well as a professional brewer, including Scott here. And yeah, that's kind of my background on the brewing side. And I started off on distribution and warehousing, and kind of showed an affection for the brewing process and getting my hands, I guess you wouldn't say dirty, but malty. But yeah, that's kind of my background, and I guess we're going to move on to my personal favorite beer that we brew, Doom Pedal. Doom Pedal is our Belgian wit beer or white ale, and the idea behind this beer is that we wanted to have something that was a Belgian beer. There were very few Belgian beers in the city of Cincinnati when we first started producing this. We produced this probably longer than American Lager, as a matter of fact. And I guess I'll give the story behind the beer. Doom Pedal is in reference to a style of music, doom metal, and also it plays on the bicycle. We have a bicycle shop here because we're attached to a bike trail. And one of our, if you notice on the can, there's a nice little mustache on the very bottom. That is an homage to one of our former employees who unfortunately passed away, and he had an awesome mustache, and he was into doom metal, and his name was Andrew White. So we decided that we were going to brew a beer at Alan White. I'm sorry, not Andrew. Andrew's his brother, and we were going to brew a beer in honor of him, and went ahead and brewed a Belgian beer, which, from my understanding, I never got to know Alan, but from my understanding, he probably would not have liked a Belgian beer. But we'll kind of delve into the character of the beer, what goes into it, what to expect. Right away on the nose, what you can expect is a little bit of a phenolic, nice spice to it, like peppery, like spice cabinet spice. When I say that, I don't mean spicy hot, but like spice cabinet. You can get a nice peppery note. Coriander, which if you're familiar with cilantro, that is the seed for cilantro. Then on the taste, it's really light and flavor, but it's packed full of wheat, which allows for there to be a nice body to the beer. And wit beers traditionally, it's very heavy-handed on the wheat. For instance, in this beer, we add malted wheat, unmalted wheat, whole kernel. It's something that we actually mill, and then we also add flaked wheat to it as well. This beer, just like the American Lager, has the base is Pilsner, and then we add a little bit of acidulated malt, acid malt, and it kind of brings the pH down of the beer, allowing for some acidity to come through whenever you're tasting it.
Just a light hint of tartness.
Yeah, it's slightly tart, but yeah, it's got a nice head on the beer. That's normally a good sign of a good white ale or wheat ale. This to all the younger drinkers out there, this is one of the original hazy boys. We brew this with Sats, which is a noble hop from a Czech noble hop, and one of my favorite hops. It adds again a touch of spice to the beer, and then we throw in a bunch of sweet orange peel. So when you get those citrusy, zesty types of flavors from the beer, it's actually derived from the sweet orange peel. And all of these ingredients are actually all on what we call the hot side. So that's the brewer's work is all done through all the ingredients, and then the yeast that we use on this is nice, and it adds a phenolic, spicy note to the beer. Scott, you could probably reiterate a little bit more on that.
It gives a little bit of a fruity ester character as well. You get just more so than you do in the American Lager, but you get a little bit of a kind of indiscriminate fruit ester character. It's just that kind of, it's fruity, but it's not strawberry, it's not lemon or anything like that. It's just a general fruitiness to kind of balance out that peppery and phenolic character. And all of that's coming from the yeast. It's a very traditional Belgian style yeast that is used obviously all around Belgium. So we're 2 beers in, and currently we use a yeast that basically comes from Germany to do a German style beer. We use a yeast that comes from Belgium to do a Belgian style beer. So we definitely believe in being very traditional, and if you're going to do a beer that's modeled after a beer from a place, then you need to try to use the ingredients from that place, as opposed to just kind of saying it's that way in name only and just using kind of whatever you want to throw in it. And as Josh mentioned, we use sweet orange peel and coriander. The sweet orange peel is dried orange peel, which is nice. So basically it rehydrates in the wort as we're brewing, and as it rehydrates, it essentially gives out all of its flavor, as opposed to if you were using orange peel that you had peeled yourself, that already has a lot of moisture in it. So essentially when you steep something like that, the moisture just comes out of it and you actually don't extract as much flavor. So we use a dried version of it. It's also a little easier to handle, and we use about 50 pounds of dried orange peel about every couple of weeks. So if we were peeling it ourselves, it'd be like 3 guys full-time jobs. We're just not quite equipped for that.
I just looked at the packaging date on this beer, and I am very pleasantly surprised with the 522 batch. You just so happen to have 522 of 20. This is kind of what I envision on this beer. This is a beer that, like I said, this is my favorite of all the beers that we produce regularly. That's another thing. This is all available all year round, and your local Kroger, of course, here at the brewery, on tap and in cans. So. And every once in a while, we kind of get a little wild and decide that it's time to do a really cool variant on it. In the past,
we haven't done one in a while.
It has been a minute, but we've done blood orange in the past. We've done lemon lime. We've done some really interesting versions. Grapefruit, yeah, that was a good one. But this beer is it's a great base to play with. As far on the brewing side, then on the drinking side, I have this thing that I like to do, and I like to take a lot of our fruited sours and mix it with this beer because it kind of raises the pH of the fruited sours. I like sour beer, but sometimes it's a little bit too acidic for me. And with Doom Pedal, it's nice to balance that acidity, and it allows the two to play very well together on fruited beer. So if you ever stop by the brewery and get something on draft, I don't know if they'll do it for you, but ask for maybe a fruited sour half and half with Doom Pedal, and I guarantee you won't be too upset about it. So.
One thing I also do want to mention, Josh talked about kind of the haze that's in this beer. Just talk for a minute about just haze in general in some of our beers. So unlike a lot of breweries, we do not filter any of our products. Filtration it can strip a lot of good things out of beer. It can strip a lot of bad things out, but it also strips a lot of good things. So a lot of our beers are packaged with a little bit of residual yeast into it, which can cause them to pour a little hazy. One thing about gravity, though, it can never be defied, and over time, some of that haze will drop out, and you may encounter a can or a 6-pack here and there that you pour that may pour a little clearer, and then when you get to the bottom of the can, it pours really hazy. So you think about all the haze that's in a can, sometimes it can kind of fall out. So with a lot of our what we suggest people do, if you're not into that kind of thing, you can certainly just pour very slowly. When you get to the very last little bit of the can, you can always leave that behind. The other thing you can do is pour about half of the can out, kind of swirl it around, get all of that stuff mixed back up, and pour it in. And depending on how long that's happened, you could actually get a very different tasting experience. The yeast can actually add a lot of body to the beer. So if the yeast has really dropped out, it tastes a little bit thinner. It's not bad, doesn't hurt anything either way, but it is a little bit of a different tasting experience. And you'll see that as we get into the next couple of beers as well, because they all have some component of haze to them for various and sundry various and sundry reasons. But if you're ever pulling our beer off the shelf and it pours a little hazy, for the most part, that's by design. If it pours a little clear and then pours a little hazy, that's still kind of by design. It's just a matter of, it's sat on the shelf for a few weeks longer, and everything's good is still in there, but it might need to be a little bit mixed back up. So just a thought there that I know we run into on occasion when people pour their beer and all the stuff comes out at the end, and they wonder if that's okay or not. There's nothing in here that will hurt you. If it looks a little weird, it's all right. Trust me, we'll get through it. So, but I did just want to make that point because you'll see in the next couple of beers also they're hazy for a little bit different reason than this one. But anything else on that one?
No. Hopefully you guys enjoy this one. This is pride and joy of mine, and I guess we'll say, Emily, do you have any questions?
Yeah,
right.
So we actually do have a couple questions. So Bill wants to know, what would be the most Cincinnati beer?
It would probably be a lager, right?
That you mean that? There's no way to answer back. I don't know if you mean that we brew or just in general. If you're speaking just in general about Cincinnati, Cincinnati was built. The beer industry of Cincinnati, I should say, was built in the 1800s by German immigrants. They were smuggling lager yeast in their suitcase when they came over on boats with the pure intention of starting breweries and brewing, German lager beer.
Prior to that, that was not a common occurrence. In the early days of the U.S., that was not a regular thing that lager beer was being brewed here in the U.S. It was typically, honestly, more rum as far as alcohol went back then. But
even starting with beer, we were first settled by basically English immigrants. So the beers of England, Britain at that time were all ales. So if you go back to the days of the Revolution and all that stuff, they were all drinking flagons of ale and all of that stuff. And that was kind of what pervaded until really about the 1800s, when there was a big influx of German immigrant population, and Cincinnati was a big source of all of that. You got to think, obviously, you're talking about western expansion at that time. Cincinnati was a fairly western city, but we were St. Louis before St. Louis was even a city. We were at one time, and I don't remember when, but exactly, but sometime in the early to mid 1800s, we were the largest per capita beer brewing and beer consumption city in the country. And that was brought on with the German immigrants who came in and started producing lager. So really just, pretty much any kind of lager beer, that's a very Cincinnati thing. Although we didn't start it, we definitely were a very big bridge of that. We were hip to it before, Anheuser-Busch was even in the country.
One more question. So Bill also wants to know, what changes from tap versus can? He said he feels like the tap tasted slightly different.
All right, so I can tell you this. It is exactly the same beer. We do not make a particular batch of beer a particular way that is destined to go into draft, and a particular batch of beer in a particular way that's destined to go to can. It is exactly the same beer. We will actually have batches of beer where half the batch will get canned and half of it will go to kegs, or depending on what we need, it might be 2/3, 1/3, one way or the other. So it starts out its life as exactly the same beer, carbonated, all exactly the same way, brewed the same way. It is one huge tank of all the same beer. Now, that said, what I will tell you, and I feel that this is pretty much true of anything anywhere ever in the world of beer, except for maybe the largest, biggest macro brewers. I always prefer draft beer. Maybe some of us, the romanticism of, getting it pulled from the tap and this and that. But what I will tell you is that, that beer is all the same. What happens is some gets diverted through a pipe this way and gets filled into a keg. Some gets diverted to a pipe this way and goes to a canning line. Well, the mechanics of filling a keg, storing a keg, all of that are very different than the mechanics of filling cans and storing cans, etc. So generally, filling a keg is much gentler on the beer. Doesn't kind of get beat up is a term that we use a lot. When you're canning a beer, it's going through a lot of stress, if you will, to get put into the can. It's shot in there at high pressures, and then foam comes out and has to get together. There's a whole bunch of things that happen that are a little more stressful to the beer that don't happen in the draft side of things. But also a lot of it is honestly what happens to it after that. So draft beer through the distribution process, we produce it. We have a big cooler here that everything gets stored in. We use distributors, so it gets shipped from us to our distributors. It's there for a little bit, then it gets shipped to bars or restaurants or grocery stores, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The logistics that are in place for all of that dictate that draft beer is pretty much always kept cold, essentially from cradle to grave. So it's cold here. It goes to our distributor, which is like 2 miles down the road. It's warm on that truck for that 20-minute ride, but whatever. Goes into a cooler when it gets there. Goes into a truck, gets to a bar, gets put in a cooler, gets put on tap. It's kept cold all of its life, which is the ideal scenario. You like for beer to be kept cold. Canned beer can go a lot of different ways. It's cold stored here, goes to our distributor. It's cold stored there. It goes to Kroger. Sometimes it goes straight on the shelf in the cold box. Sometimes it sits on a warm end cap. Sometimes it sits in their warehouse in the back warm and then gets put on the shelf and then it gets cold again. All of those things can make the beer different. I'm not going to say bad, not going to say good, but it is a little more stress on the beer. So for me, I always feel like draft beer, all else being equal, draft beer is always better. It's generally fresher because it's been kept fresher. It's been packaged more gently. It's packaged with less pickup of oxygen, which can degrade and destroy beer over time. Whereas canned beer or bottled beer, bottles are actually worse than cans from a storage life standpoint.
Light struck.
Yeah, all those different kinds of things that happen. So it's probably a real long way around that answer. It's a very good question, though. Did you say it was Bill? Bill, I don't know who else is going to ask questions, but so far that would be my question of the day. That's a very good one.
Bill's got the right idea. Most beer really does taste better on draft than it does in cans. That is until you're sitting on a river or fishing or something of that nature. Then every beer tastes great. All right. Coast, I'll get it.
Yeah, all right. So the next beer we're going to try, Josh, you can grab it for us, is the Coast to Coast IPA. We're going to do a little housekeeping here for a moment. Please ignore me. Our table here doesn't have a whole lot of excess room, so we'll move some stuff out of the way. So the next beer we're going to try is Coast to Coast IPA. If you're a craft beer drinker at all, you probably know that IPAs are basically the largest selling category of craft beer out there. And you also probably know that IPA can mean, generally it means beers that are more bitter, have a higher hop, loading to them. But beyond that, there's a million different things that qualify as IPA. Give you the super quick, well, what is an IPA? The super quick history, a lot of people know this, but I always think it's such a great story. It has to be told anyway. IPA stands for India Pale Ale. It's a style that was created by England so that they could export beer to the Indian colonies. So when India was a colony of England, and they had all their soldiers there, keeping all those poor people oppressed or whatever it was they were doing at the time. And they had to ship them beer to keep them all happy because it's 1,000,000 degrees down there, and they probably would have had armed insurrection if they couldn't keep them drunk the whole time. So they were shipping beer at this time. Everything went by ship. All the beer was done in wood barrels, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it took like 9 months to get to India from England by boat, and by the time I got there, it was all bad. It had gone bad. It was terrible. It was disgusting. And they found that by adding just a whole bunch more hops have this preservative effect to them. So they would add just a whole bunch of hops. So the beer that they would send to India, so they called it India Pale Ale. It was for export. And by the time I got there, magically, it was still at least drinkable. So when the craft beer revolution happened in the 90s, early 2000s or so, people kind of glommed onto this idea in America, and because we're Americans and we like to take what other people do and just turn it up to like 11, we glommed onto the idea of India Pale Ale, and it's got a bunch of hops in it. So we started shoving lots and lots of hops in it to where it became very, very bitter, and that was kind of the quintessential aspect of the style India Pale Ale. And there was even kind of the arms race among breweries who could make a beer the most bitter, and it never made sense really to me, but we all kind of fell into that trap, if you will. And who could make the most bitter beer? It's like, well, they used to have the old Keystone commercials, bitter beer face, and bitter beer was a bad thing. But yeah, here we are, like, no, we're gonna make the most bitter beer ever. But anyway, that's kind of how like India Pale Ale became an American style, and it became known as being very hop forward, having a lot of bitterness. In the last several years now, you've started to see a little bit of a change in that style, where we're still producing these beers with a lot of hops in them, but we're using them more for their flavor and aroma components and less for their bitterness. So a lot of IPAs these days are becoming less bitter and more hop forward in their flavor and aromas. So you can see this beer pours kind of a nice golden color, not quite golden brown, more of a very light honey color. When you smell this beer, you're going to get a lot of citrus, floral, fruity, almost a little grassy at times as well. Flavor characteristics. That is all coming from the hops that are, and the abundance of hops and when they're added. Basically, the longer you heat a hop in the boil process of brewing, the more bitterness is extracted from. There's also a process called dry hopping, where you add the hops after all the boiling area is done. You're adding it to the beer basically at the end of fermentation, and it's done kind of in a colder environment, and it pulls more of the flavors and aromas and less of the bitterness out of the hop. So this beer, we brewed this beer for a long time, but it's been through a few different iterations in its life. It used to be kind of one of those arms race to the most bitter IPA kind of style, but then about three and a half years ago, we decided to kind of move it a different direction. And now it still has some bitterness. It's got a little bit of a bite to it, but definitely not what we consider assertively bitter. It has a lot more of that flavor and aroma contribution of hop. So if you try this beer and you think it almost has like a fruit quality to it, there's no fruit used in this beer. It's all coming from the flavors and the aromas from the hops. So everybody wants to give this a try.
You might get some what we refer to in the beer world as dank notes, especially on the nose. I guess the best descriptor for the term dank would be, what do you think, Scott? What do you think the best?
It's weed.
Yeah, I think that's
marijuana.
Marijuana is the closest thing to what we use as the term dank. You can expect that from this beer. So if you ever smell it and you think, oh, that smells like a teenager's bedroom or something,
they all went to college. Come on. But the hop plant is a first or second cousin to the marijuana plant. So they do have a lot of genetic makeup that is similar. So when you think about it in that terms, there are some flavor aroma characteristics that can be similar between the two plants. And yes, you will sometimes, depending on the hops that's used, some hops are more forward in those flavors and aromas than others. Others are, some are very fruity, some are very floral. Some can be very dank, some can be a combination of those as well. The hops we'll be using in this particular beer do have a little bit of dankness to them. Kind of just depends. It's an agricultural product, so It can change a little bit year to year. We're buying the same hops from the same growers and that all the time, but one year to the next they can shift a little bit. Where one year hops might be a little more dank than in another year, and you can try to kind of blend your hops a little bit differently to try to compensate for it. Or what we like to do is just say we just kind of like to let it roll, and it's almost you can almost think of it in terms of a vintage. Oh yeah, that last year's Coast to Coast was a little more dank than this year's. Well, that's probably because the hops changed. Because again, hops are a living product, and they're not manufactured to taste the exact same every day of every month of every year in perpetuity. They change over time. There are hops that through their breeding just will actually change over time to where 5 years from now that it might just not taste anything like it did 5 years ago. At which point you have to decide, well, do we even want to use that hop anymore? Do we want to go a different direction? So that kind of also leads a little bit into how you can kind of almost reformulate these beers every, probably good to revisit them every 5 years or so and say, hey, should we tweak this thing a little bit more this way or a little bit more that way? Or should we change the hop blend that we're using because XYZ hop that we use has really been trending more and more this way or more and more that way over these past several years? We always like to think of them as, it's a living, breathing product. So, the fact that it might not be the same 5 years from now than it is today, it's a little bit different than how a lot of the larger brewers, will think about things. Again, you look at a Budweiser or a Miller, and they have several different breweries around the country, and they're trying to brew the same thing so that it tastes the same in Cincinnati when they brew it versus Columbus versus Sacramento, California, or whatever. And it needs to taste the same today as it did 5 years ago, as it did 10 years ago. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's, definitely one way to go about it. But we like to take a little more artisanal approach and just say, hey, we're going to work with what we're given. And if it means things change a little bit over the years, cool, let's go with it. So anyway, cheers on that. Just a little bit, a little more detail. This beer is 6.8% ABV. So a little bigger. We've been kind of going up in alcohol as we've gone through these. Went from 4.5 to 5 or 5.5. 5. It went from 4.5 to 5.5. Now we're at 6.8. So you're starting to feel it as we go along. It's the cumulative effects of more, but also getting a little stronger as we go.
A little history behind the beer as well. The term the beer is called Coast to Coast, and it's actually named after U.S. Route 50, which is 50. What is the state route that we're based on, and it goes from Ocean City, Maryland, all the way to Sacramento, California. And the idea behind this beer, now kind of the way that I perceive it is, it's a meeting of the two different styles of IPAs, the East Coast style or the New England style of IPAs are a bit more hazy, and they're heavily handed with oats or wheat or high protein malts or grains. And then we kind of hit it with some of the old traditional West Coast hops such as Citra and Centennial. So it's kind of east meets west idea behind the beer, and yeah, that's a little bit of the story behind it. I mean, we've been brewing this probably about 5 years, 4.5 years now.
It goes back a little.
Yeah, and but yeah, that's in reference to U.S. Route 50, coast to coast, takes you Ocean City, Maryland to Sacramento, California. Never driven it, but one day, hopefully, I will be able to. So, yeah.
So I don't know if there's any questions on that one, or if we've picked up any questions from either of the ones before.
Yeah, so we do have one question, not specific to these beers, but does the glass that you're drinking out of matter? Like, I see that you're kind of drinking out of like a smaller glass. If somebody's drinking out of a bigger glass, yeah. What does glassware matter?
Oh, so yes. I mean, well, hold on. Let me preface with saying,
no.
At the end of the day, no, glassware doesn't matter. Beer is meant to be enjoyed in whatever manner you want to enjoy it. So if you like to drink it straight out of the can, great. If you want to pour it into a shoe, great. Whatever you want to do, whatever's best for you, whatever works for you, Perfect, beautiful. That being said, can you elevate the experience of drinking a beer based off of the glassware that you're using? The answer to that is absolutely 100% yes. This is going to be a little nerdy, so bear with me. But yes, if you notice, we are drinking out of different glasses. Some, like the dimple mug that we started with a lager. The reason we love to drink out of this glass is because we just love this glass. It's a cool effing glass. It's literally not any more complicated than that. There's nothing special about this glass. It doesn't do anything other than look cool and make us feel cool. And if that helps the experience of drinking the beer, all the more better. But some of the other glasses that we've been using, for instance, with the Coast to Coast that we're drinking now, see, we're drinking this out of kind of a little bit more of a fluted glass. So when you're drinking a beer that has a lot of aromatics to it, again, like the IPA, we talked about all the hop aromas and everything that come out of this. If you're drinking this out of the traditional shaker pint, it's I don't even think we have one in here, but just kind of the ubiquitous shaker pint glass everyone's seen, it's just straight side, a little bit of an angle like that. A glass like that, if you could kind of do a X-ray look at the aromas that are coming off of that beer when you go to drink it. When you have that pint glass, those aromas are coming out of the top of that and just falling right over the edge. And so when you go to put your nose to about here, you're not really smelling anything with a glass like that. With a glass like this, because of the shape of the body and the tubing, basically the aromas are pushed up and out. So when I go to try this beer, I can kind of slosh around, but I get my nose about this close, and those aromas are wafting up into my nose. So I'm smelling the beer before it ever even hits my lips, which, I mean, I never can remember the number, but it's like 75% of what you taste is actually smell, or vice versa. But they both work together. Hold your nose and drink something, it tastes totally different than not holding your nose. So by having a glass like this, the aromas are kind of pushed out, and they hit your nose before the beer even hits your lips, which just can change and add to the overall sensory experience of drinking that beer. So for certain beers, you want to do that. For certain beers like a lager, where there's really not a whole lot of aroma that you want to get out of it. Again, something like the dimple mug or something is perfectly fine. With the Doom pedal, we use this fluted glass. Again, same kind of thing. It protrudes out, but then it kind of concentrates the aromas and pushes them up. But also the glass like this, because this was a wheat beer. If you've ever seen real traditional wheat beer glasses, they're usually kind of taller and skinnier. And that's just so that when you pour this beer, if you're doing a full proper pour of a full can, which we've only been doing half pours, you can get a real nice, big, thick meringue-like head that if you do it right, you can actually get it to even come above the glass. And you can do that with a glass like this, whereas, this is what I was drinking out of earlier. You probably can't even tell it's a cheap plastic cup. You're never going to be able to do that with a cup like that or with a glass like that. So a lot of it is the appearance of how the beer is presented to you. With a wheat beer, being able to get a nice big fat head on it, or like Josh was talking about with the slow pours, the dimple mugs are what we use in the brew pub for the slow pours. And you'll actually have this glass have a meringue that sticks up, I'm kidding you not, this high above the beer. We call it the muffin top. And you can do that with a glass like this, but if you were trying to do that in a glass like this, it wouldn't work. It's just the dynamics and shape of the glass would not allow it to happen. So, when you're using these glasses, you do that, you go to take a drink and you get it on your nose before it hits your lips.
That's the good stuff.
And so it's part of the experience. Some of it is historical and traditional, especially if you go to Germany, different styles and types of beer are put into specific glassware. Why? It's some guy 300 years ago decided that was the best glass to put it in, and we've just blindly followed it since then, which is perfectly fine, because that's just you feel like that you're drinking that beer the right way because you're drinking it out of the glass that everyone says for hundreds of years is the best way to drink it. But again, at the end of the day, whatever's your favorite way to drink it, go for it. Go for it. At the end of the day, it's just beer. It's not rocket science. But certain beers and certain types of glasses, you can definitely enhance the experience with what you're drinking it out of. Up there for probably 1A best question so far.
Francis wants to know, what do you think is the next trend in beers? They said that they think sours and fruited is popular now, but what's next?
Oh my goodness.
Me personally,
you take that one.
and I don't know if it's wishful thinking or not, but I think that we're kind of that pendulum of the fruited, crazy sour beers and the heavily adjunct, milkshake IPAs and of those ilk. I think the pendulum's going to swing backwards because in beer, a lot of times it always has. And I think it'll swing backwards to a more traditional, clean style of beer. I know that out west, there's a big movement of lagers, and that is not just your traditional style lagers. It's lagers that are aged in wooden casks for it to be 2020, and brewers to be putting beer or lagers in particular into foeders or wooden barrels and allowing it to age is something that I don't think people 5, 10, 15 years ago could even have imagined that that we were taking a step backwards, going back to putting those style of beers back on wood or into barrels and etc. I think it might be wishful thinking, but I really fingers crossed that we are moving back to more of a cleaner style of beer, more drinkable style of beer. Don't get me wrong, there's a time and place for every beer, including the milkshake IPAs and etc. But
there is no time and place for them.
well, that's not my, like I say, it's not my glass of beer or my cup of tea. But I really hope that we kind of move the pendulum swings back, like I said, to a more traditional, crisp, clean, easy drinking, something that you don't have to think about. Of course, those styles of the milkshake IPAs and the crazy adjunct pastry stouts that taste like Reese cups and etc. They're always going to be there, but I think that the American palate is forever evolving, and I think that we've kind of reached the cereal box point. And now we've got to come back the other way to relearn what we've lost over the last 10, 15 years, or how I would term it, that we've lost over the last 10, 15 years. So
I mostly agree. I mean, the biggest trends in beer the last couple of years have basically been, for the longest time, as I mentioned earlier, it was like, who can make the most bitter IPA? That was a big trend for a long time. And the natural kind of swing the other way of the pendulum was what you see with the milkshake IPAs, the pastry stouts, the what people call fruited sours anymore. They're just diabetes in a glass. They are the opposite of bitter in any way, shape, and form that anyone can do it. So we've rebounded from trying to be super bitter. Now the blowback is now we want it to be super sweet. So so sugary to the point that your eyes glaze over 3 sips in and you can't drink any more of it.
Comatose.
You're comatose. If you look at if we need to do some study in like the craft beer communities, because type 2 diabetes has got to be like going up at an infinite rate right now among like the super beer nerd people, because they're just drinking just literally unfermented sugar in a glass with some fruit puree in it. So I think what's going to happen is, because that's the way it works, is the pendulum swings too far one way and there's just natural reaction, just snap it back as far, whatever the opposite of that is, that can happen. And I'm with Josh. We're starting to, I think, see that begin to swing back the other way. But it's not swinging back the other way of super bitter IPAs. It's swinging back the other way of super clean, easy drinking lagers. And as much as it makes me cringe to say it, flavored malt beverages, seltzer, better for you beers that are, low carb, low calorie, but still taste kind of like something. Low cal IPAs. I'm not saying that's the next huge trend, but it is a trend that's been happening. And those are things that I think are the pendulum swinging the other way from the super sugary pastry stouts and
And according to, there's a well-known thing in the brewers world called the Brewers Association. They release multiple papers and articles and et cetera all throughout the year, just beer and the industry. Their style of their style of 2020 is actually the wit beer, which is what Doom Pedal is. So they say that that'll be the next style, be it that it's a clean, crisp, easy drinking beer, but it also is packed full of flavor due to the coriander, the orange peel, and et cetera. And I've kind of already seen it firsthand. A lot of other breweries here in the city. For the longest time, we were the only brewery in the city that was creating a Belgian beer all year round. And now you can actually see a lot more breweries are starting to produce those Belgian-styled wit beers, or just Belgian-inspired wit beers, you could say, because a lot of them aren't doing kind of the same thing that we do, where we take those core ingredients from that region of the world and try and recreate that style. A lot of them are taking some of the ingredients, but not quite putting the proper things back into proper materials, raw materials into the beer, in my opinion. So, but any more questions, Emily? Or
okay, let's get through the last beer and then we'll take as many as we can.
So last beer of the night. Let's do the IPA. Big old Imperial or a double IPA. This is a 9.2% big old beer. This is we affectionately call it the Hoppy Haymaker. The name of the beer, Punch You in the IPA, is a reference to a bit of a stoner or a hippie song done by Fish. Yeah, Punch You in the Eye is a jam. Fish is a bit of a jam band for anybody who out there who knows Fish. Yeah, that's it's a reference to them. This is a beer that was kind of originated back in the, like Scott said, the how many IBUs, how much bitterness can you put into the beer days. We market it as 100 IBUs, and honestly, it might be a little bit higher than that. IBUs are a little bit subjective. You can have a bunch of IBUs, but a very sweet beer, and you don't really taste the bitterness. This is typically a little bit of a sweet beer. This is kind of brewed in the West Coast style of yesteryear. It's got a lot of caramel notes to it. We add caramel malt, and then we use American grown barley as the base. And we actually use the same yeast on this beer that we do for Coast to Coast. So you get a little bit of that fruity flavor. It's kind of undistinctive type of flavors, but when you bring it to your nose, you definitely get some tropical, almost pineapple mango aromas, and hazy on the appearance.
Very orange.
Very orange. You can get some.
What I'm doing is they can see it. They have it in front of them.
Yeah, that's right. But this one has been a favorite of a lot of our drinkers or patrons for a very long time. I personally am not a hophead, as they're called, so this isn't really my glass of beer. But when you taste it, you can definitely taste that it's still got some a malty backbone. It's definitely sweet to the taste. Then on the finish, it's very bitter. It's not a dry finish like a Doom Pedal or a lager is, but it's definitely got a very bitter finish. Another thing about this beer is that when we when every July, except for this July, when we first decided that we wanted to release this beer in package, boy, we bottled it. This would have been the fifth year. We decided that we would do a really interesting event called Punch Out. And the idea was that we would get breweries and brewers or people that work for breweries into a boxing ring together and let them duke it out and have 16-ounce gloves, headgear, the whole 9 yards, 3 2-minute rounds.
Actually sanctioned by like the Ohio
amateur boxing.
Association.
It's an actual amateur boxing match. And when we decided that we wanted to release this, at that time it was in bottles, like I said, back 5 years ago. That was kind of like the coming out party for this beer. There's been almost, you could say, cult following of this beer for a very long time. Back in the day, prior to my days here, we used to have lines out the door for people just waiting to get in and get this beer on draft. But yeah, it's kind of it's gone through like most of these beers. It's had to adapt to the times. It's gone through a few iterations. This beer, I would have to say,
it used to be much drier.
Yeah, it used to be sweeter. Yeah, this is a little bit more on the. Used to be a very West Coast styled, 100% West Coast dry style IPA. The IPAs that you were drinking, if you were drinking IPAs about 8 years ago, that was the style back then. Now it's a little bit more geared towards the East Coast or the hazy IPAs drinkers, or the Midwest, I guess you could say. But, yeah, it's but if you like hoppy beer and you like high octane or high alcohol beer, then this might be the beer for you. I enjoy it, but I can't enjoy it too much because it might get me in trouble.
It's a big beer. When you taste it, you can taste and you can feel the alcohol. It's definitely meant to be a beer. We sell this beer in 4-packs instead of 6-packs. Number one, because it's a much more expensive beer to make, so we can sell it at the same price point. But also, it's just one of those things like you really shouldn't sit down and drink a whole 6-pack of it at one time by yourself. And talking about glassware again, we're using yet a different glass for this. So this is a little bit of a shorter glass. Again, you see it has some shape to it where it's curved out and then kind of curves in. Again, that's just to pull the aromatics out. The big difference here is, this is a stubbier glass, whereas this is a taller glass. Does that actually make a difference? No. Again, that's more of just a presentation thing. Generally, higher alcohol beers, you're generally drinking more of a snifter type glass. The idea is you can sit around like this and kind of warm it in your hand and swirl it around while you twiddle your mustache and plan to take over the world, kind of thing. But because of the shape of this glass, it does push that aromatic character more into your face as you go to drink the
beer. But yeah, this is Punch You with the IPA.
And, probably more than any of our other beers we do in package. Again, we talked about the haze thing. This is probably about the haziest beer that we do. A lot of that is just because of the amount of hops that are used in it. Yeast will produce some haze, but hops will also produce haze. This is definitely a beer that when you get it, and I know you're not going to see this in our screen, but even the one we're pouring that we just poured, there's a few little specks of yeast that are actually floating around in it, which again don't hurt at all, don't hurt a single thing. You won't even notice it when you drink them. It has a little more body to it. But with beers like this, if you're a little leery of that, you can always pour it a little slower. I poured this very agitated so that we would get all that out. But if you pour a little slower, you can leave a lot of that stuff behind in the last little quarter to half ounce or so of the glass. But just again, something because we don't filter our beers that you will occasionally run into. And I was trying to think. I had a story about this beer, and now I don't know what it was.
How many times we stuck it back in the day at the brew pub and you had to come over and fix it?
That's a little too inside. But I mean, so the style says Imperial India Pale Ale. That's kind of a synonymous term with a double India Pale Ale. The idea being, where Coast to Coast was an IPA, this is a double IPA. So it's not quite, but it's roughly double everything. It's almost double the amount of malt to make it. It's double the amount of hops. It's kind of double, and so it's bigger in every way, which obviously then is why you get the higher IBU rating, the more bitterness, the more aroma, the more alcohol, the more everything. It's basically, think of it as a coast to coast type or style of beer, just on steroids.
Which a double or Imperial IPA is inherently American, correct?
Well, Imperial India Pale Ale is more of a British term.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
See, I'm learning something new today too.
But again, that's like being real stickler for this kind of thing. Yeah. Imperial India Pale Ale is more of a British term, whereas in America you usually see things referred to as a double India Pale Ale. It basically means the same thing. I don't know. Sometimes people. I've actually gotten into conversations about this, like, why is our double IPA called an Imperial IPA? And it's like, well, it means the same thing. Like, anyways, that's probably a little too deep. But that's the beers. Hopefully everyone has enjoyed drinking. Hopefully everyone can keep up. Sometimes we drink fast. Sorry about that. That's the case for anybody at home. And then if there's any other questions, Emily just popped back on here. So, got anything else question-wise for us?
Yeah, we do. So we have about 4 more questions. One of the questions.
We'll try to go quicker.
One of the questions is, what are some of the beer names that you created but were voted down? If you can share with us.
Oh boy! Don't get me started.
So we do have a marketing department. So when we create a new beer, we generally give them either it's a very generic name or it's a name that we really like while we're producing it. So because we have a computer system that tracks all the beers, so you have to call it something so it knows what to to assign ingredients to it, et cetera, et cetera. So we always give them a name starting out. Sometimes it's just calling it what the style is. Sometimes it's like we have a really cool name we think of for it. But ultimately, we have a marketing department that is in charge of deciding all of those things. So, they want everything to be very on brand, and that's what marketing people do and stuff. So, 99.9% of all of our beer names generally get shot down. I can't even. Yeah, you probably got some better ones.
My personal favorite. So, I would say probably about maybe a year and a half ago, we did a Norwegian hazy IPA. What made it Norwegian is we used a relatively new yeast called Kvike yeast, and it comes from Norway. And we ended up calling it Sea Stallion, which is actually a name that I had given it, which was a term that they used to describe their boats. The Vikings is what I mean. And the original name that I wanted to call it was Sleipnir, and Sleipnir was the 8-legged horse that Odin rode when he was flying through the sky in Norse mythology. And I was like, oh, that's such a cool name. It's such a cool history. It fits the Norwegian thing. And I got shot down very quickly because I sent it in on Slack or like a group message, and I don't think anybody knew how to pronounce it. So Sleipnir was probably my number one. Was nobody knew how to pronounce Sleipnir, but that was my number one miss out on a beer name.
I mean, I will say that when we're naming them ourselves just to get them through production, we know 99% of our names are going to get turned down. So sometimes we just put ridiculous names on them, even knowing it's going to, but we know what, I won't say what any of them are because they're mostly highly offensive. But yeah, we have let's just say we have a marketing department that comes up with all the names for us. And they take this much of our input.
Yeah.
It sounds like you guys still have a fun time though, trying to come up with some.
Oh yeah, we don't let them keep us down.
So, along with that, somebody wanted to know. John wanted to know, Bridget wanted to know: are there any beers that you want to brew but have you not yet tried?
There always is.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them I don't even know what they are yet.
Yeah,
they haven't come to us yet.
There's a lot of. I know Scott, for one, wants to do a smoked lager, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah. We will, eventually.
Which I'm all about. I'd love to try to brew a smoked lager, but I'm not sure how, yet again, marketing or the powers that be would be about trying to sell a smoked lager. I think it might be a little bit difficult. I mean, I would crush it probably regularly.
Every now and then we can sneak one past them and they don't realize.
Yeah. We've in probably the recent history, the last 6 to 8 months, we've snuck some really cool ones by them. One being, what did not the grisette? What was the one that Ryan did?
The purple.
Yeah, we did it. We snuck in a grisette, which is essentially a petite saison, and yeah, for the longest time we were not allowed to brew saisons because saisons are
hard to sell.
It's one of those things, if you can't pronounce the word or if you look at the word and it looks funny, it's one of those things that your average beer drinker would not be interested in. And we're fortunate enough to sneak that one by.
I like to brew with a lot of odd and interesting ingredients and do them in a way that fits into a beer and really balances and works as opposed to like being some really weird gimmick. But those kinds of beers are hard to sell, so we only get to do them every grade right now.
Yeah, very rare, but probably I'm on board with Scott on the smoked lager. And how we would do that?
We'll do one.
How would we do that, Scott? How would we?
I can't tell you because it might get back to the boss. So we'll make it happen.
We'll sneak it by and they won't know a thing.
Okay, so two more. George wants to know who would be your dream brewery to collaborate with, and what is your favorite beer to drink or the one that you're always searching out when you're on the road?
Oh, that's a really good one. The dream brewery that I would like to do a collaboration with, the dream brewery that I would want to do a collaboration with is honestly probably Cerebral Brewing Company. They're out of Denver, Colorado. They are kind of well known for their oak aged, foeder aged, wood aged lagers, which is like I said, an up and coming style on the West Coast. I had the fortunate chance to taste their beers at Great American Beer Festival last year. Well, I went to Great American Beer Festival last year, which is held in Denver every year, and just was tooling around town checking out all the really cool breweries because it's Denver, Colorado, and there's a dime a dozen, and strolled into Cerebral, and they had about 5 or 6 lagers on draft, and one of them was a foeder or a big wooden big barrel aged lager, and it blew my mind that it was a clean, crisp lager, but there was this wood character to the beer that really was accentuated through the actual lagering process. So that would probably be my number one collab brewery that I would do. And then the beer that I always seek out, no matter where I go, I've got to say it's Avery White Rascal. Their white ale. Like I said, Doom Pedal's my number one favorite beer, and that we brew here. And White Rascal from Avery Brewing, which is also a Denver-based brewery. That is the beer that if I'm out and about here in Cincinnati and eating, drinking, sitting at a bar, sitting on a patio, whatever, Avery White Rascal is the quintessential perfect beer for me.
I would just say, as far as collabs, I always go back to the breweries that I've always admired, even back 20 plus years ago when I started homebrewing, and people that I've met along the way but not had a chance to work with. The top two, just trying to think of it off the top of my head. I'd love to be able to do some kind of a collaboration with Russian River Brewing Company or Firestone Walker, both of which are out of California. They're breweries that I've always looked up to, always admired, even from the earliest days, even starting back when I was homebrewing, and then as a professional brewer, they're pros as it goes in the brewing world. get to brew with those guys, I think would be great. And there's a numerous list of other people behind that too that I would be super excited to get to brew with. As far as the beer, I got to kind of take a cop out on this one. There really isn't a specific beer that I always seek out. I'm always trying to find new things from new places. Usually, the beer that I'll seek out the most is something from a brewery that I've heard of or heard good things about, but I haven't had a chance to try. So usually, especially if I'm not in town, if I'm somewhere new or just away, I'm always looking for, if I'm in a certain city, I know of breweries that are in that city that I've never had a chance to try. I'm seeking them out and trying to find them. So trying to find new things. The older I get, I don't really have that many just like go-tos anymore, where it's just like, because I've been around long enough to where those beers aren't the same beer they were 20 years ago. They've evolved, which is not a bad thing, but it's just, they're less and less my go-to just because they've changed, my tastes have changed, everything about the world has kind of changed. So it's always kind of an evolving thing.
Plus, you're a dad now. You don't get to go out as much.
Honestly, I don't. Yeah, I never get to go out. I get to drink like low fills from here. That's like half the time. Your breweries open up, and I don't even know about it sometimes. What? That's that place I drive past every day on the way home now.
So I know Scott said that his favorite was, or not Scott, Josh said his favorite was Doom Pedal from 50 West. What's your favorite 50 West beer, Josh? Or Scott, sorry.
Well, of the main beers that we do that are available in cans and grocery store, I'd have to say probably American Lager is my favorite. Just because it's a beer I can sit down and drink and not have to think about too much. It sounds like a good problem, but it becomes a bad problem over time. I'm very, very analytical about everything that I drink. So when I drink beer, whether it's ours or other breweries, I'm always, I wish it had a little more of this or a little more or a little less that. So I'm very critical of things, and especially with our own beers, because we drink enough of our own beers because we have to. Tasting batches and stuff, like it gets a little hard because like you'll drink a batch of Doom Powder and be like, this is just a little more phenolic than the last batch was. I like the last one better. I mean, 99.99% of the population can't tell the difference, but I can. And sometimes it's like, oh, I don't like this one as much as the last one, so throw them all away because whatever. But American Lager is always just this easy one. It's like it's number one, it's pretty darn consistent, but also it's just there's not a huge amount of nuance there where I have to sit and think about it and be like, oh, it's a little more of this or a little more of that or a little less that. So I can just drink it and just not think, which to me is like one of my ultimate escapes now is, when drinking beer, like not having to think about it too much.
That is my close number 2 for sure is American Lager. It's definitely a toss-up. Kind of depends on what I ate that day or what I'm eating at the time, I guess. But yeah, American Lager and Doom Pedal to me are head and shoulders above most of our beers that we produce. That's just my palate, my preference. Though.
Just for variety purposes, we really mostly drink all of the draft-only beers that we produce on our small batch system, because those are always changing, evolving. They're never the same beer twice. So honestly, most of the time we drink that. Yep. So you have to come down here to try those. Okay.
Just want to say thanks, guys. Appreciate you coming and checking out the
whatever this is, virtual.
The virtual web.
It's our first time doing this, if you can't tell.
Yeah. I really hope that you guys come down and check out the brewery. We just recently opened up a burger bar. Burgers are great. We have 13 different styles. Each one's represented, or 12 different styles. Each one's a representation of the states that Route 50 runs through. We have 16 beers on draft.
New beer, outdoor beer garden.
Yeah,
it's really the only thing that's open right now.
Yeah.
Our inside spaces are not really back open yet.
Yeah, we just opened the beer garden since all this COVID stuff happened.
Everything's very, very properly socially distanced.
Yep,
Just
we're
FYI.
cleaning everything, doing all
Our
that.
tables are like 20 feet apart.
Yeah. And we're
Not
unfortunately
much.
no volleyball going on right now because of COVID. But if you enjoy the beach or enjoy sand, you can come down to the brewery and enjoy a beer while sitting in the sand or having your toes
Or
in
if
the
you got
sand.
kids, bring 'em. Kids love sand.
Yeah. But yeah, it's been like I said, I've been here for about 5 years, and I'm a very lucky individual to have this job and to be at this place and to work with such well-educated individuals such as Scott. Um, it's an honor to brew the beer that you guys drink, and I really hope that you enjoy the beers that I literally put my blood and sweat and
Oh, wait a minute,
very
not literally.
well. I actually have.
Don't start something.
Now, don't worry, it gets boiled out. But yeah, that I put my heart into, and I hope you guys enjoy it. And if you don't, that's okay too.
You work very hard, even though we're one of the bigger craft breweries in Cincinnati. We still do things very, very hands-on, very traditionally. There is a lot of artistry that goes into what we're doing. It's definitely not just pushing a button on a big machine and then beer comes out the other end. So any time that we get to express our artistry and have people enjoy it is always great for us. So definitely want to thank everybody. It's a little weird thanking everyone when I don't know how many there are or who they are or where they're at or if they're even paying attention. But definitely want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Thanks for picking up the beers. Hope you enjoy them. Hope you got a few left over either for tonight or tomorrow or the rest of the weekend. And if you like what you had or even if you didn't, I guess come down and check us out and try some of our other stuff and have a burger and like Josh said, hang out in the sand or the Astroturf. We have a bunch of Astroturf too. It's very,
Actually
very
really
sweet.
nice.
It's like walking on carpet outside.
The Astroturf was quite nice. I'll say that.
So but seriously, thank everyone for coming out. Thank Emily for putting this together, and hope you enjoyed.
Yeah, thank you both so much. So thank you both to Scott and Josh. I hope you all had a great time. I know you were both a lot of fun to listen to, and I definitely learned a lot, so I hope everyone else did as well. Just a reminder that this video will be on the ALC site, so feel free to please share this with any of your friends, family members that were not able to attend. And also just a quick reminder that next weekend is Virtual Alumni Weekend. There are so many fun virtual activities taking place on June 11th, 12th, and 13th, including Virtual Alumni College, Black History at Miami, trivia, yoga, another Jack wine tasting, and also a